Hi everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Canvas, our fifth net workshop this semester. I'm Anaya Abdelgaber, a fifth-year political science student at Memorial University, one of the universities participating in this semester's net workshop series. Thanks to everyone joining us. I'm happy to be your student host today. Today's event is part of the net workshop series and is the fifth of 6 events this semester. The series is a partnership between 7 Atlantic Canadian universities, including St. Mary's University, University of Prince Edward Island, including their campus in Egypt, Memorial University of Newfoundland, Dalhousie University, University of New Brunswick, Cape Breton University, and Mount St. Vincent University. We had 3 net workshops, including today, designed to inspire and motivate you, provide you with the resources you'll need to get started, and help you build a network of like-minded people from across Atlantic Canada. This is our final net workshop. Additionally, we have a series which includes 3 fireside chats titled Women Leading Startups. These chats are open to all students who want to be a part of a supportive virtual community for entrepreneurial women. Our next chat this semester will be on Tuesday, April 6th at 12 p.m. Atlantic time and 12:30 Newfoundland time. These chats are brought to you by the Canadian Ecosystem Gathering and will feature a different female identifying startup founder from Canada each month. Check out the link in the chat to sign up now. Now it's time to kick off Beyond the Canvas. Today's topic will be on drilling deeper into problem and customers and the customer segment boxes using a leaner canvas approach to craft the customer switch story. For today's net workshop, we have partnered with Propel, Atlantic Canada's virtual accelerator. So before we get to hear from Maurya today, we will hear from Catherine Lockhart, CEO of Propel, to speak a little bit about Propel. Then we'll hear from Charlotte Murray, Chief Coaching Officer at Propel, who will introduce Ash to the stage. At the end of the presentation, we will have a Q&A session led by Charlotte, which will be followed by our networking sessions, where you will have a chance to interact with others and share your ideas. With that being said, I would like to welcome to the stage Catherine Lockhart. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, very nice to be here. Thank you so much for having us. Us meaning myself and Charlotte from Propel. And I really can promise you a real treat today, being able to hear from Ash. So we're really excited to be partnering with Ash and the Lean Stack content. So we use that very much. It's a foundational part of our program at Propel. So I'm going to give you a tiny overview about Propel. First of all, for everyone in the audience, all of the students who are able to attend today, I'm so excited to meet you. I know I can't meet you how I would normally want to meet you, but I'm excited to know that you're all learning about entrepreneurship and learning how to take that to the next level and considering it as part of your future. That is incredibly exciting to us at Propel. We get very excited when we think about bringing potential founders into our program and really our vision. We have crazy visions. We want to help create baby unicorns in our region in Atlantic Canada. So we focus on really finding fantastic, passionate founders who want to make an impact and take their ventures to the next level. And when they graduate from our program, they're really making an impact in society and realizing their dreams of growth. And how we do that, we're a virtual pan-Atlantic accelerator. We have world-class content, which you're going to see a sneak preview of today. And we have dedicated coaches. So you're going to get a flavor of what the capacity that Charlotte brings to the table. She's our Chief Coaching Officer. And having dedicated coaches in such an important entrepreneurial journey is one of the huge strengths that, Propel gets really excited about. So I'm going to turn it over to Charlotte as she introduces Ash. I hope you all enjoy the session, and please keep Propel on your radar as you think about entrepreneurial paths forward, and know that we're very excited to support that journey should you choose to really pursue it. Go ahead, Charlotte. Over to you.
Thanks, Catherine. I'm really excited to welcome Ash to speak with you today. We started working with Ash in 2018 because we saw the importance of really validating the idea that you have before building. And that's one of the things that I wish I had known when I had my startup years ago. And so with Ash, one of the things that I really love is that the format and the structure and the methodology that he has developed is something that's applicable to many different businesses, because in the end, you're trying to solve a problem for a specific customer segment. And so the way we approach it is we take his methodology that you're going to learn about today and apply it with the dedicated coaching, like myself and others in our coaching team, to really help you work through this approach in a disciplined way, to hold you accountable to what you commit, and also to make measurable progress so that you can validate or invalidate your idea quickly. And so with that, I'll leave it at that and hand it over to Ash. It's really nice to see you, Ash, even though it's virtual this time, and enjoy the session.
Thank you, Charlotte. So let me go ahead and get my screen up there. So we're titling this workshop Beyond the Canvas. A better title would have been Going Deeper into the Canvas, because we're going to take a zoom in into two of the boxes, as was mentioned in the introduction. Specifically problem and customer, and you will see why as we go through this workshop. I'll start off with a little bit of a story to kind of set the stage. And so as a kid, I grew up listening to music on cassette tapes, and I know that many of you may not know what that is, so don't worry, I'll have a picture for you a little bit later, so you've probably seen these growing up somewhere. But after the cassette tapes, I moved to CDs, and the question is why? Some of you might think it may have been for better sound quality, but again, as a kid, I could not tell the difference between the sound quality. After CDs, I moved to MP3 players and then streaming, and then the question there also is why? MP3s, for one, had inferior sound quality, so it wasn't really necessarily a better product from that perspective. And so that's the theme of today. We're going to be studying why do we switch from one product to the other one, and what causes that. On the other spectrum, I will also share a story of how a company like 3M manages to take inventions that are rather accidental. They invented glue that didn't stick so well, turned it into $1 billion business. They more recently invented glue that sticked all too well, and maybe you've used this product. It's the command strips, which we can use to hang stuff on the wall. And again, how do they get into these kinds of innovations, turn failed inventions into these big ideas and these innovative products? So there's something else at play here, and that's what we're going to be studying. As entrepreneurs, we are all tasked with building better products, but the big key question is, what does better really mean? Now, it starts by first recognizing that customers don't care about solutions. They really care about achieving better outcomes. And so that's the first thing to kind of internalize. The best way to get a customer's attention is not by pitching your solution at them, but by really first getting razor focused on who you're talking to. And that's where the customer segmentation comes in. And then being able to describe their problems using language that is very clear and concise, and sometimes even better, describing their problems better than even your customers can. That's how it starts. If you have a deep understanding of their problems, you get their attention, and then you have the opportunity to present your solution. Now, I know all of you are familiar with this tool. This is a good beginning. So this is a good start. Today, we are specifically going to go deeper on these boxes for the reasons that I just described, is that when we initially take a stab at the lean canvas, we go around thinking of the entire business model. And oftentimes, we all know that we should be prioritizing problems before solutions. At least we know this at a logical level. The challenge, of course, is that when you've already decided you want to build a solution, when you've already decided you want to build a hammer, or sometimes you've already built that hammer, the questions you ask are very different. You don't ask, what problems can I solve for customers in the general sense? We instead ask, what problems can I solve with this hammer that I built? And that's what I call the innovator's bias. And we already start biasing the canvas, and it looks a lot like this picture. And so today I'm going to share with you an antidote. The first thing I will say is that don't worry if this has happened to you, it happens to everyone. All entrepreneurs have this innovator's bias. I have it too. And so what we'll be talking about today is some deeper exercises you can take next to try to backtrack from this bias and put your ideas on better footing. It starts with a very simple premise. And the technique we're going to be talking about, I call it the innovator's gift because it's the perfect antidote to the innovator's bias. And the premise is very simple. When we are looking for problems to solve, you don't have to come up with new innovative problems. If your problems are innovative, your customers don't understand them. You actually want to find problems that are old problems that come from old solutions. Now, it sounds like a very simple, maybe too simple of an idea, but let's go back to that music story. So if we start asking the same question, why did I switch from cassette tapes to CDs? It wasn't because of better sound quality. It was because of a killer feature that the CDs had, which was instant access. And again, if you're familiar with cassettes, it is an analog device. Trying to find a song is not an easy task. You can make mixtapes, you can have Sony Walkmans, you can go around, take your music with you. But if you wanted to play a specific song, you had to rewind and forward, and it took a few minutes to find that perfect song. With CDs, you had instant gratification. And so when you see that, that's the one thing that makes cassette tapes, which were perfectly fine, now broken. And so the problems were always there, but they now surface because you see a better solution. If we take this a step further, why I switched from CDs to MP3 players was, again, not because of better sound quality, but because, one, my CDs started to scratch, MP3s don't scratch. But more importantly, MP3s allowed us eventually to only download or buy the songs that we really care about, not the entire CD. So that caused massive, massive switching. And I can just finish that story off. Why I switched from MP3s to streaming, or MP3 players to streaming, was that 1,000 songs in my pocket was no longer enough. I rather chose to have access to 40 million songs in the cloud that I could wirelessly stream and even rent, not really own. And that's the state of where we are today. Now, as a kid, if you had told me that one day I would be barking orders at smart speakers in my house and music would magically appear from the clouds and start playing in my rooms, I would think you're a crazy person. But in my lifetime, this has happened. And what is guaranteed is this is going to get even better. This is going to change. And that's what makes innovation so fun. So this is this basic idea of switch. Innovation is fundamentally about switching. But the way you cause switch is not by building some new, better solution that nobody understands, but rather the best way to cause switch is to really communicate your product in terms of problems that people are already living. And if that either becomes surfaced or it becomes more apparent, then that can cause these kinds of massive switches. So let's put this in a more pictorial form so you see what that journey looks like. So this is what we call the journey of the customer buyer journey, or how customers consume, buy products. And it's an important model to understand to kind of put that innovator's gift into action. So this is basically how customers live their lives. Right now, nothing is happening. And this is our steady state. We're not really buying anything. Throughout the day, we get triggered with all kinds of things, whether these are marketing messages, whether these are things happening to us. You know, it's going to be lunchtime for some of you. You're going to get hungry. Maybe you're going to buy lunch. Maybe you're going to just have lunch. So those are the triggering events that cause us to take action. A triggering event basically creates a need that we have, or a want that we have that we want to fulfill. And that's the story of how we go about our day. Now, for every one of these triggering events, and so here's a simple example first. When you were tired last night, you wanted to get some rest, you wanted to go to sleep. And so you hired your bed for maybe 8 hours. Maybe some of you sleep longer, some shorter, but you hired your bed for 8 hours and you got that job done. And so this is the first thing to kind of recognize, is that for most of the things that we want to do in a given day, we usually already have existing solutions. There are old solutions out there, and everything is all good. What causes us to switch, or what causes us to consider a new solution, is when that old solution breaks. And what causes that to happen is some kind of an expectation violation. So an expectation violation is some change in your world where all of a sudden your old way doesn't work. we are all living through a very big triggering event, the pandemic, and you all, I don't have to go and give examples there, but you all have had very different products that you have had to go buy, from the way that you learn, from the way that you buy products. A lot of that has changed in the last year, and it's because of this triggering event which broke many of the old solutions, and now we have to go look for better ways. So this is essentially how people buy anything. There has to be a triggering event, and if you search hard enough, you will find it. Now, when the triggering event happens, it creates motivation for something better. People don't always act on the triggering events, but if the problem is big enough, so in bringing this in just the perspective of learning, the choice between not learning and learning is rather obvious. You can maybe do that for a little while, but at some point, learning has to go on, and so we find new solutions. So when the motivation for the desired outcome at this top of the hill is high enough, people consider new solutions, and we change our old ways. Your job as an entrepreneur is to understand the equivalent of this story. The way you find your best early adopters is finding those people that have been triggered to go up this hill. They're in search for something better, and if you can now design a better product that fits that hole that they have, that's what's going to cause a switch. And so that is the task here, is how do you create an offer at the top of the hill that is better than the old way? And I call this a mafia offer. Again, this is a rather old movie, but it's a classic. Hopefully some of you have seen it. The Godfather. In The Godfather, there's a line about how the mafia builds offers that people cannot refuse. I kind of took a play on that and turned it into mafia offer for entrepreneurs. So how can you build an offer your customers cannot refuse? And the secret to do that is by anchoring against the old way. If you can convince your customers that your new way is better than their old way by talking about the problems that they're already aware of. So when you're pitching the CD, don't talk about sound quality, talk about rewinding and forwarding being a problem. If you can do that, that will cause a switch. So that is fundamentally the model here. We will, again, bring this into the Lean Canvas and how you might do this on the Lean Canvas. But for now, the big takeaway here is when you are coming up with your problems, try to anchor it against the old way. And the old way on the Lean Canvas is the existing alternative box. How are people currently solving the problem today? Before we dive into the Lean Canvas, one other thing I want to cover is thinking in terms of not functionally better products, but emotionally better products. So when we think of something that is functionally better, that's where our features and benefits live. We are still in the solution world. We're still in the product world. And sure, you can cause a switch, but when you cause the massive switch that I'm talking about, it's about hitting on people's emotion. Imagine being at a party and trying to play a song, but not being able to do so because you don't have a CD. You have to take a few minutes to go find it, but you only have 10 seconds to get the next song in the playlist. So those are emotional jobs versus functional jobs. So you want to always be searching for how can you be triggering on wants, desired outcomes versus needs, which are more functional outcomes. To give you a simple example of that one, we'll go to this drill bit example. Some of you may have seen this quote. This was a very powerful marketing idea that's pretty old, but still very relevant on how we should focus on outcomes. So if you were a drill bit manufacturer, you're not selling a piece of metal, you're selling essentially a 1/4-inch hole in the wall. And so if you were a drill bit manufacturer, you might want to find ways to drill better holes. You might build you might build stronger drill bits, you might come up with all these different features, but those are not going to cause switch, they're just going to make your product better. We can go a step further. Instead of just building a stronger drill bit, as a startup, if you instead ask yourself about the outcome, this outcome is a functional one. I don't know anyone that has brought me into their house and said, look at this perfect round hole that I've drilled in my wall. Isn't it beautiful, right? That's not what they're really after. So we know that this is an intermediate step. This is not really the finished outcome. And so we have to ask the follow-on question, which is, what is it after the hole? What comes after the hole? What are people drilling this hole for? And this is where we find the bigger context. And this is what you all should be searching for. This is where we find outcomes, and not just outcomes, but desired outcomes. So when we search for the bigger context, it starts by sometimes doing some discovery work. You can go and talk to customers and ask them, why are they doing certain things? And you can get to that. Sometimes we can logically just apply a 5 whys approach. The drill bit example is rather simple. Many of you can probably guess what happens after the hole. So we can sometimes just ask that questions ourselves and get to something that is more desired versus undesired. So nobody wants a hole in their wall, so we know that's not where we should stop. We should go a level higher. So what will you do with this hole? Somebody might secure a hook in the wall. We know that that's also not a desired outcome because they're going to do something else after that. What comes after that? In this case, they're going to hang a painting. And if you're talking to somebody, if you're talking to a customer, you will probably see some emotion in their body language. Maybe they will smile because when they hang paintings, this has an emotional response. This is where the emotional job really lives. And that's when you know you are somewhere interesting. And we can go several levels higher, but we might stop here and now start to ask the question, the job to be done here is hanging a painting. That's what our customer wants, not drilling holes. How can we get them to hang a painting on a wall without drilling a hole? Drilling a hole sounds easy, but it's actually quite messy. There's mess on the ground. Drilling holes is very anxiety ridden. There's no undo button. If you drill a hole in the wrong place, you now have more work to fix it. If you're drilling 2 holes, you have to make sure the holes are level, that they're in the right distance from each other. So it's pretty complicated. If you're very handy, this is something that comes easy to you. But if you aren't, this is it's something that requires lots of other tools and a lot of experience to kind of just pull that off. And so could we come up with a better product, a simpler product? And that's exactly what 3M did. So they built this glue that stuck really, really well. And so rather than leave it in the lab, they actually turned it into these command strips. And I'm guessing some of you have probably used this and noticed the use case is right on the pack. So even if you don't know this product, if you are fumbling around in the hardware store trying to find a drill or a drill bit to go hang some paintings, and you find this is not going to be in the glue section or in the tape section. This is going to be placed right next to the drill bits, because in this world, the 2 things are competing against each other. And that's a key takeaway, is how does glue compete with a piece of metal? And this is exactly how. When we start looking at our ideas in terms of outcomes, when we start looking at our ideas in terms of what customers are trying to do, all of a sudden you can find yourself competing with all kinds of things you never expected to be competing with. And it's important to uncover those, because that's who your customers are really going to compare you against. So when you're at the hardware store, you see a piece of metal, costs $20. You see this, costs $10. This one is way easier for the job that you want to get done. You actually take this one instead. And so that's how this happens. These kinds of switches happen. Here's a helpful code for how to think of this for yourselves. So when we are building products, we often get razor focused in the solution world. We are like the drill bit manufacturers. We only focus on functional jobs, and we ask ourselves, how do we build better features? How do we make our product simpler? But we are stuck in that solution world. What I'm advocating is getting 1 or 2 levels above that. So if you simply ask the question, what are people trying to get done? And if you simply internalize trying to build not a better X, not a better product, but a better user of that product, that's going to get you a lot further. And if we apply this to the drill bit example, if we simply ask this question, don't make a better drill bit, how can we make a better homeowner, if that's the customer segment we're going after, all of a sudden you can come up with all kinds of solutions. If you're the drill bit manufacturer, one of the problems that people struggled with in that story I just told is they didn't know how to drill holes. Well, what if we offered free classes? What if we got them into the hardware store and over a weekend we had a workshop where we taught them how to drill all the holes they wanted, and they could practice on practice walls. They could break as many drill bits as they want, and eventually the drill bits would stop breaking and they would become better at using the drill bit. And guess what they'll do is they'll go and buy a whole drill set from us. Right? So that's a way that a drill bit manufacturer might internalize this. And we saw how 3M did this. And whoever is in this story, the key question is not how do we build a better product, but rather how do we build better users of that product. That's where we find the bigger context. And the bigger context is where you find these spaces for innovation. So let's tie all this back to the canvas. So I mentioned we're going to take a deeper dive. But the model was important to get out there so you understand a few of the takeaways. So one of it is innovation is fundamentally about switch. And with that, there is a implied premise also, which is every product is going to have an old way. In other words, every product out there has an existing alternative or has competition. And this is probably a challenge for some of you. If you do have this question, we can take that in the Q&A. Or actually, I'll frame it as a challenge instead. If you can think of a product, a very disruptive product for that matter, that had no competition, I'd like to hear about it. And I'm saying that there probably is competition, but I've not checked every product in the world. So if you have one in your mind, let's workshop that. Let's talk about that. But what I'm saying for now is that every product out there needs to have an existing alternative. So your canvas needs to have that box filled. And if it isn't filled, oftentimes it might be because you're not looking far enough. You might be like the drill bit manufacturer, think you're competing just with other drill bit companies, and because yours is titanium, it's the best. But as we saw here, you may not be competing against other drill bit companies. You might be competing against glue or other products in the market. So understanding that is really critical. Now, the way that people fill out the canvas, when we look at it the more regular way, this is how everyone does it in the beginning, which, as I said, is perfectly fine, is they generally have a customer problem in mind, but they also have a solution in mind. And so the questions they ask themselves is, what problems can I solve with my solution? And that falls into that innovator bias trap. The way they fill out the canvas generally is in this order. Let's identify our customers. Let's identify how we will qualify our early adopters. And here I oftentimes see a lot of attributes, a lot of guesses on gender, age, geography, demographics, size of company. There's a lot of different things here, which is all fine, but sometimes that can be too much, but that's okay. But we still want to identify, we want to know how we identify our early adopters. So that's generally where people go next. After that, people will list existing alternatives. And oftentimes I see a lot of direct competition. But what I'm advocating here is start thinking of those non-category competitors. I can't tell you how many software startups I have met that were killed or their products didn't work, not because of another software company, but because of a product that was email or a spreadsheet type of a product. So in other words, you might be building great collaboration software, but if the company is using email to get collaboration done, that's who you're competing against. Nobody ever lists email as their competitor. I guess Slack did, but very few companies will say we are competing with email. But that is, in that case, the competition that you're really going up against. So that's one of the things to kind of start thinking about is, are you really identifying the right existing alternatives? And then where people end up is then start listing out problems that either they think their early adopters have, and sometimes that bias sneaks in, where if you have the solution, we start asking ourselves, how can we solve problems with our solution? So this is the more traditional way of doing the lean canvas in this order, 1, 2, 3, 4. I would recommend taking your canvases that you have, but making an argument in a very different way. So the Innovators Gift is not about starting with your solution or even your early adopters and their problems or your guesses at their problems. You want to instead start with existing alternatives. That is the most important box on the canvas. It sounds like it's problem, but it's actually existing alternative, because existing alternatives will help you uncover those right problems. And so the way to kind of treat this is you may still start with narrowing down on your customer segments, but there's already one change here. And this goes back to the switching story I told. No product gets bought or sold unless there is a triggering event. And so one of the things you want to be looking for within your own customer segments is the what has changed question. What has changed in their world? Did they recently move into a new city? Did they have a baby? Did they get promoted? Did they get fired? If you're going after B2B companies, did they get a new CEO? Did they go through an acquisition? Did they go through a pandemic? All those are examples of things that are changing, which are going to break some old ways and require them to look for some new ways. So that's a challenge for you, is start to look for triggering events, not just demographics, not just persona type stuff, but really psychographical triggers that have changed in that customer's worldview. then we want to go and start really narrowing down our existing alternative list. Here, it is very easy to brainstorm 10 different potential things people are doing. But what you really want to do is narrow that down to who your true competition is. When Steve Jobs was pitching the iPad was a new category device. He didn't compare it to other tablets because people didn't know what a tablet was. He compared it to the laptop because that was what he envisioned the iPad competing with. And he made a whole case for it in his demo, in his pitch. And that's how the iPad took off, and that's how it actually launched, and it was hugely, hugely successful. And fast forward today, the iPad is still competing with laptops. Yes, the iPad can be used for many, many different things, but you have to pick one. You have to pick one in the beginning that is your true competition, because it makes your value proposition crystal clear in the mind of those customers. So notice everything here has to connect. If your customers aren't using this existing alternative, it's game over, because they're going to look at your pitch and say, yes, you have a good solution, but it's not for me because I don't use these existing alternatives. So everything here has to connect. Your early adopters have to be using these existing alternatives. And then this is the key part, the key takeaway from today, is that at the end of this process, when you are framing your problems, you have to frame it not in terms of your solution, but rather in terms of specific problems these existing alternatives have. If you watch the Steve Jobs pitch, he was comparing the iPad to the laptop, and he would talk about all the problems with the laptop. It was big, it was clunky, it had this big keyboard, it was not intimate. You couldn't take an iPad, a laptop to bed and do some work, but people take the iPad to bed all the time. So those were the types of things, the stories he was telling and how he pitched his product. So I'll kind of leave it here, and we can probably go into Q&A. If we need to come back to the slides, we can definitely do that. But that's really what I wanted to share to kick things off.
Great. Well, thank you, Ash. So I did want to kind of pick up on that challenge that you put out to the group to see if there's anyone who has something to share in terms of a product that you think has no current solution. So I did want to kind of kick it off with that, because I think that there's a lot we can explore with that. And I don't know how I get to see responses from the audience.
Sure, that could be a bit interesting.
Yeah. Well, in the meantime, while we're getting an answer there, maybe you can just address, one of the things that's challenging as an entrepreneur is, having not being shy or being nervous to do customer discovery, especially if you're still early days in your product. So what are some strategies that you've seen to help founders overcome that and actually do that customer discovery that is so important?
Yeah, so what I always did, and so I will just come out and say that while this now seems like it comes naturally to me, I was a closeted technical geek myself. I actually invented more ways not to talk to people. So let's use surveys and let's use all kinds of tools to get people to vote and things. But it takes just a few of these to realize that there's a lot of learning you get instantly. But I didn't start with strangers, and that's the tactic I'll share. Is when you're trying to do these, it's perfectly okay to start with friends and family even. At the same time, be very careful to discount what it is that they're telling you, because many times our friends and family are very biased. They know us, they like us. And depending on how they perceive entrepreneurship, they may encourage or discourage you from going down the path you're going. But it's still a good way. So there are a couple of things that I would say are good things. One is to have some kind of a script, some kind of a meta script, to at least organize how you're going to do the interview. And for me, at least, that helped to build my confidence, so that even if I got stuck, didn't know what to ask, I could look at my script and would have the next question ready to go. And what you quickly find out is that once the conversation starts, it becomes pretty casual, and it's just the beginning that is usually a bit not rocky, but it's important to just get over that initial hump. So using friends is a good thing. The other tactic I find that is sometimes helpful is go and actually study a product you don't even care about. So go stand in front of a supermarket or outside a hardware store with a clipboard in hand and just say you're doing some research. And if somebody comes out with a drill bit, ask them, I'm doing research, I wonder why you bought that drill bit, and just have a conversation with them. And I find that you can apply the techniques a lot more easily in that context when it's not your product, because you don't know what you don't know, and it's just perfectly okay to ask questions. When it's your own, we start putting safety gloves on, and we start wanting to hear the answers, and we start pitching and all those things. And so that's a good technique for not doing those. So those are some ways to kind of get started. And definitely, if you start with your friends, the next best thing after friends is to ask your friends for warm referrals. And there also, you are now not talking to complete strangers. They may be a friend of a friend, and the learning becomes a bit more objective. And that's a great technique, friends and then referrals, to break the ice. And I guarantee once you do even 2 or 3 of these interviews, it actually starts becoming not as scary as it looks in the beginning.
And just as an extension of that, I really like the idea of talking to friends first, and then asking for referrals is always a good next step, no matter what. But in terms of talking to friends, to what extent would you want to already have a hypothesis around who your early adopters or who your customer might be? Because again, you want to discount some of where they're coming from if they are a friends or family. But to what extent is that important from an early starting point?
Yeah. So going back to what I said about triggering events, ideally you want to find friends and family that match the early adopter, and it doesn't have to match your perfect ideal customer profile, your perfect persona, but they need to have at least gone through, like they've either bought a product that you are considering to be an existing alternative, or they have been triggered similarly. So just to share, one of the stories I shared in Running Lean was building a photo sharing app for parents. And again, I did that because I was scratching my own itch. I had recently become a parent, but I didn't go and talk to friends who didn't have children. That would just be kind of silly. So I went and talked to friends who, like me, had recently become parents. And so that would be definitely what you want to use in your outreach to friends, not just any friend, but they have to match your early adopter criteria in some way.
Another thing that you hear a lot is, you're doing customer discovery, or you think you're doing customer discovery, and the outcome is, yeah, they were really interested. They really liked it. So what are your suggestions around, you mentioned the 5 whys. So like, what are your suggestions around not hearing what you want to hear, but actually hearing their truth?
Yes. So there are kind of 2 perspectives. There's a perspective of the entrepreneur. So when you are having the conversations, you want to, in some ways, slow down time and ask a lot of fact-based questions, which you may normally think you don't care about the answer for, but it's all for getting you and the person in this mode of being a bit more like a journalist trying to get information. So if I was trying to find, let's say I was a fitness coach and I was doing some research for people who might be wanting to get fit, I would start with people who joined a gym recently. So I'll go and talk to them. And in my opening, I would ask them about the gym they joined, when they joined it, what day was it, do they remember if it was raining outside? Notice these things have no consequence probably to the product I'm trying to build, but it's about trying to get the other person to remember facts. We know just from eyewitness testimony is that people start forgetting things very, very quickly. And that's a little technique for them to start remembering some of the details that you need to really know. And so when they start remembering, oh yeah, it was a Sunday, or no, actually they'll go back and say it might have been a Friday, and actually it was a Friday and I didn't go alone, I went with someone. Now they've remembered a lot more stuff that they can tell you. So that's a good mindset to get into, is really slow down time and try to get a lot of these details in the conversation. And that's a great disarming technique, both for you and for them. Then the conversation just starts, and they actually just sometimes won't even stop talking. You kind of have to cut the conversation short. But when I'm doing this as a coach, when teams come up to me and said, oh, I talked to somebody and they said they like my product, I actually I say, let's pick the last interview you did, tell me the story. And I can very quickly tell in 2 minutes whether they really went deep or it was a very leading interview, which was more like a pitch, because they don't have all these details. The way to kind of say this a different way is that we don't know what we don't know. The insights we're looking for are sometimes hidden in all these details. And so when you're not searching for those details, you just sometimes miss a lot of obvious insights. And so I would highly recommend doing it. And also when you're reporting the learnings, don't just summarize them and say, oh yeah, people said if I built this, they would buy. That is a very leading type of a response. Instead, it should be more about, I know people will buy this, or I think people will buy this because they are currently using these products and they told me they have these problems and these are the workarounds they're doing and this is how much money they're spending and they're trying to build their own solution. Notice how deep that goes into like more specific. So that's what we want to ideally see.
That makes a lot of sense. Also, just in terms of, you know, what you mentioned in terms of being functionally better or emotionally better, to get to that emotional element, getting that context around, you know, what day it was they went to the gym, if it was raining, that kind of elevates it to something that could be an emotional trigger that we don't know yet. So even coming back to your hanging the art on the wall, you know, the next level up that you talk about is it was a husband wanting to hang that piece of art for his wife. So in the end, it's to keep the wife happy. So I mean, you can dive deeper on that. So great. We do have a question from the audience from Devyani. She's saying, hello, Ash. I have a question from your Lean Stack courses for customer discovery interviews. What kind of questions should you stay away from?
Yeah, so in the customer discovery interviews, I would say the questions are all good. I would stay away from statements. Whenever I see, and we sometimes have our teams record their conversations, and when I see an entrepreneur, so the opening is great. Like you can set the context, you can say a bunch of stuff to set the stage. But during the interviews, it is best for you to ask very short questions and really more questions that are prefaced with how, who, when, tell me more. You know, those types of things are great ways, or I'm confused, could you clarify this? You know, those are great kinds of questions to get the facts. So again, think of it more as being a newspaper reporter or a TV producer trying to get a documentary, or just asking those kinds of fact-finding questions. When people start making statements like, oh yeah, you know, or judgment, like, you know, that was like that gym, I know that was bad. I also went there and I had this experience. Those just become things that you just want to stay away from, because that's not the purpose of the interview. In terms of questions, I find that there are really no bad questions, but sometimes you can definitely get into people's comfort zone when you start asking very personal questions, especially if I'm like trying to talk to a stranger who has a new baby. You know, that can be sensitive, and so you may even just at the very beginning say, if you know, I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, but at any point if you feel like you don't want to answer, it's perfectly okay to say more questions is definitely a good thing.
And just to close out on the questions and what to ask or not ask, what is your perspective on having a customer discovery call that is also a solution call?
Okay, so I like to flip, I like to separate them in the beginning. So when we are doing pure problem discovery, I like to get teams, as tempting as it might be, if I'm that fitness coach and I see people struggling, you know, they're joining these gyms and really having a bad experience, I'm so tempted to say, I have a better product for you, come and buy it right now. But I want to bite my lip and make sure that I'm not just selling it to one person. I want to make sure I do enough interviews first. And so you have to be disciplined. And that first, we call them sprints, but a sprint is just a time-boxed kind of window. So maybe in those first 2 weeks, just focus on doing problem discovery interviews. You can put a little hook at the end saying, you know, based on what you described, we're working on something, and you can give a little glimpse of your high-level concept or your unique value proposition and ask for permission to follow up. You can basically make an excuse that I know we only reserved 30 minutes. I'd love to show you a demo, or I'd love to show, you know, come and back and talk to you. I think we have something that can help. Can we set up a follow-up meeting? So in those initial conversations, I actually encourage everyone not to just jump into pitch mode, really focus more on getting the facts. Now, once we have gotten enough of those interviews and you start getting ready to go into solution interview mode, at that point, it's still a good idea. If you look at very seasoned salespeople, they spend some time doing a little bit of discovery to make sure they're talking to the right person. And so you may just state the problems. You can say, we built this product because these are the problems we found. This is why we built this product. You know, talk about the switching trigger and like what the problems people struggle with, and look at the other person and look at their body language. If they are completely confused, then you know you did not nail their problem. But if on the other hand, they're nodding their heads or they're saying, yes, tell me more, then continue. And if you find that they don't acknowledge the problems that you just stated, I would turn that into a problem discovery interview. So there is a fork in the road. If I go in, I don't want to pitch somebody something that they don't want. So if I say, I think you have this problem, we have this pandemic, we can no longer go to work, we have to do video conferencing, but video conferencing software is broken, here's why. And people look at me like, no, everything is perfectly fine. I'm going to ask them what video conferencing software they use and turn it into a problem discovery interview. So that's kind of how I look at that.
Great, thank you. So following from that, there was another question. Customer needs are ever changing and could change very often. Do you think a business should always change or update its solution to stay ahead of the competition? Or is there a limit to switching the solution to fit the customer needs? Sure.
So needs change, but I would say that the big switching, so this again is where one of the messages in the stories that I told is that in order to cause a switch, we're not talking about incremental needs changing. So like when my drill bit breaks, building a stronger drill bit is an incremental change, and those are constantly changing. And if you are a company, you are always improving your product, but you have to keep an eye out for those big out-of-box changes. And those needs will change based on kind of sometimes new solutions coming in that can make the job be done, way better than what you're currently doing, or they can be done maybe at the same level but with half the steps, right? We saw with the command strip, and the end result of hanging a painting looks the same whether there's a hole or not a hole, but the steps to reach it are way simpler with the command strip. So you have to keep an eye out for those kinds of things. And if you're in a startup, I would say in the beginning, we are trying to find how can we cause a switch? So how can we find existing alternatives and come up with a big enough unique value proposition when people see it, they're like, I want your product. Now, once they are with you, you don't have to come up with big innovations. You kind of will keep people with you for a while, but you have to also recognize that at some point, there are other startups out there that are trying to steal your customers. And so you do have to keep an eye out for those big need changes. So there are big hires and little hires is how when we use the language of jobs to be done. In the beginning, focus on why do people buy your product, so big needs, and then keep them with this little needs for a little while you have an eye out, because if you completely get tunnel vision, that's when disruption happens. That's when other people come and steal your customers. So continuous innovation is about simultaneously playing offense and defense with your business model.
But I guess an incremental feature for, build one more feature and then they'll sign on is part of the smaller hires, I guess.
It is, but I would be careful with that. So sometimes the build one more feature, sometimes also called the killer feature or the search for the killer feature. Sometimes that is the mythical killer feature, maybe is a better word I was using for, is unless you really know with evidence that if you build this one thing, people will buy. The best way to know it is to take their money for you to build it. So collect money and then build it versus build it and then hope they will buy. But that's a danger we all fall into, which is customers tell us the reason I'm not buying is because you don't have this. And so you go and build that and they still don't buy because now it's not this, but it's that. And that's the mythical killer feature trap. So we want to avoid that. And so again, there are techniques in your solution interview to sell before you build. So show them a demo and sell the demo and try to get a real commitment, not just I like it, I will buy, but take their money if you can, or the next best thing to taking their money. And that's going to put you in a much better place and it's still an incremental, yes, improvement, but it's also an incremental improvement in the right direction, which is the point I wanted to make.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. So we did have a suggestion from the audience, Ash, on a disruptive product that doesn't have competition. Yeah. So it's interesting to hear what your thoughts are on the toothbrush.
The toothbrush, okay. So actually the toothbrush is the reason I'm kind of laughing is that a toothbrush is actually an interesting thing because people were not brushing their teeth regularly, even going back 100 years. But if we were to even say that, so when we talk about a story like that one, we have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of the product? So what do we use toothbrush for? So obviously it's to brush our teeth. what were people doing before that? So how did people keep their teeth clean? And this is where there were a lot of practices, like you could probably rinse your mouth. I don't know if so I don't know the history of like what people, all the things that people did, but we know people had like bad teeth. And so some of the alternatives were, when you have bad teeth, you might go to the dentist and they pull your teeth out, or like those are like the things you are doing, but those are the alternatives. And so obviously the toothbrush is a miracle. The toothbrush and the toothpaste is like a miracle product, because now you don't have to get your teeth pulled out. Would you rather have your teeth pulled out or keep all your teeth till you're much older? So the way I want to, again, have you think of the challenge is that we have to ask ourselves, when these, it's very easy to say this product is a new category, people had no alternatives, but life went on. We had teeth and we had to keep them clean, or we got cavities and they decayed. And even if that were happening, people dealt with it somehow. Maybe painkillers were another alternative. When people couldn't keep their teeth clean, they had to take painkillers. They had to get, I don't know if they probably were not dentures, but like whatever the equivalent of the alternatives were, that's how you might think of it. I'll maybe throw like 2 examples there, which also kind of go into that kind of a path, to just give you some more other examples. Sometimes people have thrown out the internet. Before the internet, what did people do? And again, we have to ask ourselves, what did people use the internet for in the early days? What was it replacing? And that one is a bit easier to see. It was replacing looking up information, the yellow pages, having to call people, having to remember their numbers. You could do all that just by doing a quick search, having to know the addresses. And today we rely on so many things, but back then it was, even Yahoo started off as a simple directory, like a simple yellow pages. And that was even what they called it. The other one is fire. So when you look at fire, and that's a very old invention, and it is technology. Before fire, what did we do? As a civilization, we still had to eat. We could not cook foods, but we had to eat things that didn't require cooking. So again, so eating is the bigger context. That had to happen for sustenance. So we were more gatherers than hunter-gatherers, but once we invented fire, we could use it for cooking. And that changed, it actually changed the course of our own. So one of those inventions that changed our standing in the food pyramid, but that's how you might think of those kind of ideas.
I hadn't thought of fire. That makes a lot of sense as well. Very, very interesting. So we have about 5 minutes left. There is another question from the audience, fairly broad, so I guess you can interpret however you like. What new opportunities does artificial intelligence unlock in terms of business model development?
Yeah, it is fairly broad. And so a better question to ask is, so that is technology, and technology is a triggering event. So just like the internet, once the internet came about, some of those early pioneers start saying, what are people struggling with? Where could this fit in? And so that is the task. When someone says, what can I use AI for? Again, that is a technology looking for a solution. Instead, ask yourself, and you can brainstorm. You can say, let's go into different industries. Let's look at banking and where could AI help there? Let's look at exercise. Could we use AI for that? But then quickly narrow down to an outcome people are trying to reach, and what are they doing today, and how could AI be way better than what they're doing? And with AI, the other thing that is a bit of it's not a chicken and the egg, but it's a multi-sided problem, is that there's always the data collection side. Too many times people are only interested in the magic of AI, but you have to remember that you can't come up with these machine learning insights till you have enough data. Just like Facebook, they can't make their business model work till users voluntarily give up their privacy to them. Once that happens, the business model works. And so similarly with AI, unless you can get access to the data, that is usually the biggest risk I find. Focus on the user side first. In whatever industry you go into, whether it's banking, real estate, health insurance, you have to find a way, a hook to get people to opt in to give you their data. And even if it's anonymized, that's all perfectly okay, but you still have to have access to it. There's a tipping point when that becomes interesting, and then figure out for the customer what it is that they are going to do with the outcome of the data, right? So yeah, so that's, so if you were selling this, maybe I'll just leave that there, but that's a way I'd have you think of that.
Makes a lot of sense. In the end, we're looking at the outcome, whatever that outcome is, and the AI is kind of the facilitator of that outcome, potentially.
Exactly.
So we've just got a few minutes left, Ash, so I thought I'd just leave the floor to you in terms of final words for the group, tips, what's next, any of the above.
Yeah, so I guess the key mindset I'm actually wearing it is love the problem, not your solution. But it's as you can see on a t-shirt, it makes for a good bumper sticker, but it's a very hard but very critical thing to practice. And this is one of the messages of today, is that when we are looking for problems, basically don't try to come up with new ones. You are really always looking for existing ones. In the beginning, when you are causing switch, you are trying to look at that from the perspective of who you're trying to take the customer away from. And then you want to keep doing this in your own product. If you stop listening to your own customers and the problems they have with your own products, then that's when you kind of leave openings for others to steal away your customers. And again, more easily said than practiced, but that's why I kind of bring that up multiple times, is the innovator's bias rears its ugly head in many forms, not just in the beginning, but at every stage of the product. And so just like in science, we have first principles. Whenever you have a problem, we try to break it down. Similarly here, whenever you have an idea, even for a new feature, you want to break it down and make sure there's always enough evidence to do something. I would rather have a team do nothing for a week just to figure out what to do next. And you will actually find that by going slower, you end up going a lot faster, much later.
I really liked what you said in terms of the innovator's bias coming up a little bit all over the place, including not just at the beginning of a product. That is a good reminder, because definitely once you think you've solved that, you can move on. And it's like, no, you have to continuously, and it's also talking to customers, right? That never ends either. It's just the questions that change. So with that, I'd like to hand this back to Anaya. Thank you so much, Ash, for today.
Yeah,
really nice to see you. I'd love to get one of those t-shirts. And with that, I'll hand it back. Thanks very much.
Awesome. So hi again, everyone. First, I wanted to thank you, Ash, so much for your presentation. It was a pleasure to hear from you about ways to craft the customer switch and focus more on the customer and the problem rather than solution. Also, thank you, Catherine and Charlotte, so much. It was amazing partnering with Propel again on another network shop. So now we are done with our live event part of the series, and we have networking session. So the steps to join networking are: you click on the networking tab on the left side of the screen, and you share your camera and audio, and you get matched randomly with someone else in the room for 3 minutes, and then it matches with another person after you're done. It's a fun and low effort way to meet people and that you wouldn't normally meet or get a chance to chat with, especially virtually. And if a conversation isn't great, no worries. You'll be matched with another person in just 3 minutes. Myself and as well as a lot of the attendees will be there. So don't log off just yet. Come say hi in networking. And thanks everyone again for joining us this afternoon. And I hope to see you again in our next fireside chat on April 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.